Hey, welcome to the show, and Aish, today we're diving deep into some seriously shady business. We're talking about the scandals that shook Africa to its core, the stories that made headlines and had everyone talking, from the grandmothers selling bananas to the politicians in their fancy cars. We're talking about corruption, my friends, the kind that makes you shake your head and say, Aish, how can? But hey, we're not just here to gossip, we're gonna break down these scandals, meet the big players, and see how the law tried to clean up the mess. So buckle up because things are about to get interesting. First up, we're heading to West Africa, to the land of cocoa and high-life music, Ghana. Now, Ghana's known for its vibrant culture and peaceful politics, but back in 2018, Aish, the country was hit by a banking scandal that would make your eyes water. Imagine this, you put your hard-earned money in the bank, trusting them to keep it safe, and then, poof, the bank goes belly up, your savings vanish like a puff of smoke. That's what happened to thousands of Ghanaians, my friends, and it was all thanks to some seriously shady dealings at the top. We're talking about bank executives, the guys in suits with fancy titles, allegedly treating the bank like their personal piggy bank. Loans given out like free candy, bad investments that disappeared faster than a loaf of bread at a family reunion. It was a recipe for disaster, and disaster is what they got. The Ghanaian government, to their credit, didn't just stand there with their arms crossed. Oh no, they swung into action, shutting down banks left, right, and center. It was like a game of banking musical chairs, and nobody wanted to be left standing when the music stopped. But here's the thing, shutting down the banks was just the first step. The real question was, who was going to pay for this mess? The taxpayers, of course. Yes, you and I, the hard-working people of Ghana, had to cough up the cash to bail out these banks and try to stabilize the entire financial system. It was a bitter pill to swallow, especially when you realize that the very people responsible for this mess were living large, sipping on champagne, and probably laughing all the way to, well, you know where. Now, the government did try to bring some of these bigwigs to justice. There were investigations, arrests, court cases, the whole shebang. But let's just say that the wheels of justice in Ghana, well, they turned slower than a snail in a peanut butter factory. Years later, and many Ghanaians are still waiting for answers, for justice, and for someone to be held accountable for the financial earthquake that shook their nation. The 2018 banking scandal was a wake-up call, a stark reminder that even in a country known for its stability, corruption can lurk in the shadows, ready to pounce when you least expect it. Now let's journey over to Nigeria, the giant of Africa, the land of oil, jollof rice, and unfortunately, some of the most brazen corruption scandals you'll ever hear about. And trust me folks, when it comes to corruption in Nigeria, we're not talking about small-time stuff. We're talking about industrial-strength, Olympic-level corruption that would make even the most seasoned cynic raise an eyebrow. So picture this. It's 2012, oil prices are through the roof, and Nigeria, being one of the biggest oil producers in Africa, is swimming in petrodollars. But here's the catch. Instead of that oil wealth trickling down to the people, improving lives, building schools, hospitals, you know, the things governments are supposed to do, it's getting siphoned off, disappearing into a black hole of corruption. And the biggest culprit? The oil subsidy program. Now, on paper, the oil subsidy program was supposed to make fuel cheaper for everyday Nigerians, but in reality, it became a feeding frenzy for corrupt politicians and their cronies in the oil industry. Imagine a giant pipeline, but instead of oil, it's filled with cash, and there are all these greedy hands dipping in, scooping up as much as they can. That was Nigeria's oil subsidy program in a nutshell. Billions of dollars, yes, you heard that right, billions, vanished into thin air. Contracts were awarded to shady companies that existed only on paper. Fake fuel imports were documented, with ghost ships allegedly delivering nothing but air. It was a free-for-all, a carnival of corruption, and the Nigerian people were left wondering where all the money went. Now, you might think that a scandal of this magnitude would be met with swift justice, right? Wrong. The Nigerian government, notorious for dragging its feet when it comes to holding the powerful accountable, took their sweet time investigating the scandal. Years went by with little to no progress, while the Nigerian people grew increasingly frustrated and disillusioned. Finally, after immense pressure from the public and the international community, the government started making some noise about cracking down on corruption. A few high-profile individuals were arrested, including a former minister of petroleum, which, let's be honest, is like finding a penguin in the Sahara Desert, something's fishy. But for the most part, the big fish, the real masterminds behind this epic heist, well, they're still out there, living large and probably sipping on champagne that was bought with stolen oil money. The Nigerian oil subsidy scandal is a stark reminder that in a land overflowing with natural resources, it's often the people who suffer the most while the corrupt elite line their pockets. It's a story that's as frustrating as it is familiar, not just in Nigeria but across the African continent. Hold on to your seats, folks, because we're heading south to South Africa, the land of Nelson Mandela, breathtaking scenery, and unfortunately, a scandal so big, it makes the other scandals we've talked about look like child's play. I'm talking about the Guptas, a family who managed to capture not just a few government contracts but the entire state itself. The Guptas, a family of businessmen from India, arrived in South Africa in the early 1990s, just as the country was emerging from apartheid. They started small in IT and media, but their ambitions were bigger than Table Mountain. Fast forward a few years, and the Guptas are tight with the top dogs in the South African government, including then-President Jacob Zuma. The Guptas allegedly used their influence to secure lucrative government contracts, often at inflated prices. We're talking about deals involving mining, energy, transportation, you name it, the Guptas were there. Rumors of the Guptas' influence spread, and soon, the hashtag #GuptaMustFall was trending on social media with protests erupting across the country. Journalists worked tirelessly, following the money trail and publishing explosive revelations. Jacob Zuma, facing impeachment and growing public anger, was forced to resign. The Guptas, facing arrest, fled South Africa in a private jet, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. The Gupta scandal is a cautionary tale about the corrosive effects of state capture and the need for vigilance and transparency in the fight against corruption. Let's hop over to Kenya, a land of breathtaking safari, vibrant culture, and a scandal so audacious it makes your head spin. I'm talking about the Goldenberg scandal, a tale of gold, diamonds, and deception. In the early 1990s, Kenya faced a foreign exchange crisis. The government, desperate for a solution, decided to export gold and diamonds. But Kenya wasn't known for its vast reserves of gold and diamonds. Enter Goldenberg International, claiming to export gold and diamonds. The government granted them generous export compensation schemes, ignoring the fact that the gold and diamonds were fake. Yes, the gold and diamonds were fake. Forged documents, shell companies, and corrupt officials created a symphony of deception. Billions of shillings were siphoned out, leaving the economy in shambles. You'd think swift justice would follow, right? Wrong. The legal system took its sweet time. Years went by with little progress while the key players lived large. The Goldenberg scandal is a classic example of how corruption thrives with greed and incompetence. It's a familiar story, not just in Kenya but across Africa. Despite numerous inquiries, few were held accountable. The masterminds are still out there, enjoying their gains while Kenyans pick up the pieces. The Goldenberg scandal is a reminder that the fight against corruption is a marathon, not a sprint. And now, my friends, we arrive at the darkest chapter of our journey, a story so horrific, so tragic, that it transcends the realm of mere scandal and delves into the abyss of human cruelty. We're talking about the Rwandan genocide, 100 days of unimaginable violence that left an indelible scar on the soul of a nation. In 1994, over a span of just 3 months, an estimated 800,000 Rwandans were brutally murdered, victims of a genocide orchestrated by their own government. The Hutu, the majority ethnic group, turned against their Tutsi neighbors, unleashing a wave of violence that swept across the tiny East African nation. The seeds of this hatred had been sown years earlier, fueled by ethnic divisions, political manipulation, and a toxic propaganda machine that dehumanized the Tutsi minority, labeling them as cockroaches, as enemies of the state, as a threat to the very fabric of Rwandan society. And when the Hutu president's plane was shot down on April 6, 1994, it ignited a powder keg of resentment and anger, unleashing the genocidal fury that had been simmering beneath the surface. Hutu militias, armed with machetes, clubs and guns, roamed the streets, slaughtering Tutsis and moderate Hutus who dared to oppose the killing spree. Neighbors turned on neighbors, friends betrayed friends, and even priests and nuns, those who had dedicated their lives to God, were caught up in the frenzy of violence. The world watched in horror as images of the genocide flooded television screens, bodies piled high in churches and schools, rivers running red with blood, the haunting pleas for help from those who knew their time was running out. Yet despite the overwhelming evidence of genocide, the international community, for the most part, stood by, paralyzed by inaction and political calculations. The United Nations peacekeeping force on the ground was woefully understaffed and outgunned, unable to stem the tide of violence. The Rwandan genocide stands as a stark reminder of the human capacity for evil, of the devastating consequences of unchecked hatred and intolerance. It's a story that demands to be remembered, not just as a historical event, but as a cautionary tale, a reminder that the world must never again stand idly by while genocide unfolds. In the aftermath of the genocide, Rwanda was left in ruins, its social fabric torn apart, its economy shattered, and its people haunted by the trauma of what they had witnessed and endured. The road to recovery has been long and arduous, but Rwanda has made remarkable progress in rebuilding its nation, fostering reconciliation between Hutu and Tutsi, and working to ensure that such horrors are never repeated. The Rwandan genocide is a stark reminder that the fight against genocide is not just about remembering the past, but about confronting the present and challenging the ideologies of hate and intolerance that continue to plague our world today. Aish, my friends, we've journeyed through some dark chapters in Africa's story today, haven't we? From banks collapsing to oil vanishing into thin air, from families capturing entire nations to the unspeakable horrors of genocide, we've seen the devastating impact of corruption and impunity. But you know what? It's important to remember that these scandals, these tragedies, they don't define Africa. They don't represent the spirit of its people, the resilience of its communities, the hope that still burns bright across the continent. So keep asking questions, my friends. Keep shining a light on the dark corners where corruption festers. Keep demanding better from your leaders, from your institutions, from yourselves. Because the fight for a more just, more equitable, more prosperous Africa, well, it requires all of us to stand up and say, enough is enough. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay hopeful. Because a better Africa is possible, but it's up to all of us to make it happen. Peace.